What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And I'm Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive. And we are in our 5th week of our Joseph series. And what are we talking about today, Dave?
Today's a pretty heavy topic. And I know you were away at another church yesterday, so you didn't hear it. So we get into some stuff today. Basically, we're talking about betrayal and forgiveness, reconciliation, that sort of thing. So it's a heavy, heavy topic, but it's getting into a really good part of the story of Joseph. So I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Well, let's get into it, shall we? All right, Dave, like you kind of mentioned at the top, I had the opportunity to go over to Bascom United Methodist Church and preach there yesterday, and had a good time. And it's actually interesting because I was talking about Daniel and kind of the life of Daniel, and it seems like there's some similarities between Joseph and Daniel in terms of just living consistent, faithful life, and just kind of being in the right space.
Are folks that have a lot of integrity and are great examples for us. I think, and maybe Daniel will be my next series. I don't know. You give me an idea. I love preaching on these Old Testament characters. They're really good, and I enjoyed preaching every week, but I really enjoyed preaching yesterday. I like that part of the story, and there's some good points that I think are real applicable to our lives as well. So it was good. Yeah. What about the rest of your weekend? Yeah.
Otherwise, the rest of the weekend was pretty relaxed. Our youngest, Finley, had a volleyball tournament. So it was kind of her first tournament with a club team, and that went well. And we're starting up our volleyball season with the Cherokee Parks and Rec here soon. So dusting out my volleyball coaching.
Well, I've got some sort of big news. I've already shared it with you earlier this morning, but I'll let folks know. My daughter is moving to Cherokee County with our new grandbaby, moving about 10 minutes away from us. They put a offer in on a house, and they accepted it. So that's going to be happening. It's going to make my life so much simpler. Teresa's life so much simpler. To have her here, we feel like we got some. We've put down some roots here in Cherokee County, and so it's good to have them close by. And life is pretty good.
Ooh, are you going to make Connie happy and put another baby in the nursery?
I think so.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So so it's all looking really, really good. So anyway,
awesome, right. Very cool. Well, Dave, why don't you kind of give us a quick rundown of what you talked about, and what are we going to dive deep into?
So we have been tracking through the story of Genesis, which is the story of Joseph, which is in the latter part of Genesis, and we began with his family of origin, and today we kind of circle back into it. His brothers were jealous of him, envious of us. There was a lot of family conflict. But brothers, initially it talked about even killing him, but ended up just betraying him and selling him into slavery.
Right.
And that started like 2 or 3 weeks of sermons where we talked about what happened to him and how he showed integrity and worked through that. Eventually got double-crossed and put in jail. And then, by the grace of God and the talents that he had, was able to get out. I guess just the tail end of how he got out of jail. He had this gift of interpreting dreams, which we spent a lot of time last week's podcast talking about. But he eventually, the word gets to the Pharaoh that he can interpret dreams, because the Pharaoh had some crazy dreams, and the dreams were about, once they sinned for Joseph, the dreams were about that there was going to become 7 really good years, great harvest, economic prosperity like they had never seen. But those were going to be followed by 7 horrible years of famine, and it was going to be destitute. And Joseph's wisdom was, Pharaoh, you need to get prepared now. You need to build some storehouses. You need to get ready so that you can make it through. I know it's going to be really good, but it ain't going to last forever. So you need to, these next 7 years, be preparing for the 7 years that are going to follow. And you need to find the right person to put into that position to do that. And Pharaoh said, you know what? I think you're that person. I'm going to give you that position.
You do it.
So suddenly he comes from being in prison to being in the palace as second in charge.
Yep.
The only person that was over him was Pharaoh. He's what they called the governor. So he went about that during those 7 years and built up those storehouses. And then the famines, as he had predicted from the dreams, came. And it was really, really hard times. And so as the scripture started out, as I was reading this week, we talk about, what that was having. And Egyptians from all over the place were coming there to getting grain into, so they can survive. Well, this is widespread. And so it's all the way to Canaan land where Jacob and the other sons were, where his brothers were.
Yep.
And so Jacob gets word that in Egypt they've got some grain, they've got some stuff. And so he sends 10 of the boys to go, gives them the silver to go, and he sends them to Egypt. And but one important part of the story is he does not send the youngest, Benjamin, Joseph's little brother. Rachel had 2 children, Joseph, who is the favorite of Jacob's, and then the little brother. And so he is super protective of him, doesn't want to let him out of his sight because he doesn't want any harm to come to him. He's already lost one son.
Yep.
So they go off, they get there, and they come before Joseph, but they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. So the story's getting good. So they bow down before him, say they've come to get grain.
Kind of like the dream.
Kind of like the dream.
Yeah.
They bow down before him and he recognizes them. And so that gets to a part of the story is like, what's going to happen next? He is in the power position right here. He recognizes them. They don't recognize, who he is. And so I made some points right up front, which I'll throw out now, because as we see the rest of the story, we can see how that kind of unfolds. And the first one is this, that the true reconciliation, his brothers are back together. Yep. He has no reason to trust them. But true reconciliation requires more than words. It requires change. And so he has no idea if these brothers have changed or not. They could be the same scoundrels they were before.
Yeah.
They could be very dishonest. He has no idea. He has experienced great harm from them. And so he has no idea of whether or not they've changed and done that. So he's going to be looking for change in them. The second thing is trust is easily broken, but hard to rebuild.
Yeah.
And I think we've all experienced that.
Absolutely.
I think at whatever level, betrayal is something that's almost universal, right?
Yeah, and I think holding the way we hold the grudges and stuff like that is how, we respond in some of these situations. I like the part, your first point of reconciliation comes from watching the change in the other person, because I think that's where some unhealthy habits happen in our relationships when we sometimes will forgive too fast and not see the change in people, and we're just kind of setting ourselves up for consistent failure.
I think as Christians, we're taught to forgive. Forgiveness is very important, and we'll have some more about that too. But and that was my third point, which I'll go ahead and lay out, and that is that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, right?
Yeah,
and I think that's what you're
that's kind of the point I was trying to make, is that when you kind of deal with the trust, or when you kind of say, like, okay, as Christians, we're called to forgive, so we take that step to forgive somebody. That doesn't mean we give them 100% of our trust back. We kind of let them earn that.
They're going to have to earn that back,
right?
Depending also on how deep the betrayal has been,
right?
And if this has been a pattern with them, because otherwise we're going to become a doormat. They're just going to use us,
right?
But if people are truly trying to change, we need to see some signs of that. And so Joseph, the way it's presented in Genesis, he looks pretty good. He's a human being. You've got to think he's got to have a little bit of grudge going on. But it's not really shown in Genesis. But like he has been deeply hurt, And there's several times through the scriptures, and I told this mostly as a story because it's spanning over like 4 chapters.
Yep.
But like 2 or 3 times in there, he breaks down it and cries just because of the triggering of these people that have hurt him so much, these people that should have been taking care of him. They were his big brothers. They should have been watching out from him. Instead, they did this incredible wrong to him that really changed his life trajectory. And so what he does, he says, okay, they say, we're here, we want to buy food. And he says, no, you're not. You're spies.
Yeah.
You're spies. And he's really kind of setting up a test. And they're going, no. We're honest men. We're honest men. We are honestly here because we need food. We've got money to buy
for it, yeah.
to pay for it. We are not spies at all. We are. Then he goes on. He says, we are the son. We're from Canaan. We're the sons of one man. There were 12 of us. But now there's only 11, and the younger brother, the baby brother, is back home, and the other brother is no more. And so they don't go into detail at that point. But Joseph knows. Yeah. They're talking.
He knows very well what the story is.
They're talking to Joseph. He says, "No, you're spies. We're going to throw you in jail." And so he does. And so they're talking, and they're talking in front of Joseph. So they're speaking to the language, but he can understand them. And they're saying, we are being punished by God for what happened to us. And then Reuben chimes in, I told y'all not to do this. Now, we're suffering the consequences of it. So they're in there, I think, for 3 days. They get out, and he says, okay, I'm going to test you. First of all, I want you to go home. One of you is going to have to stay, collateral. And then you've got to bring back the little brother. And they're really not in the power position here, but they do push back a little bit because they know their dad is not going to go for this.
Yeah.
But they say, no, that's the deal. And so they load up, they pay him their silver. They'd all brought silver, apparently individually. They all brought silver because they've got, I guess, the tribes and their kids and stuff.
Yep.
So they've all brought their silver. They pay, and he gives them the grain, and they start back home, and they get the first campsite the first night, and one of them opens up the stuff with the grain and looks in there, and the silver's there because Joseph's put the silver back in there. And they're going like, oh my gosh, they're going to think we,
stole it all.
So like, why is the silver here? And so they finally make it back home. And, Jacob comes out and, they say, well, we got the grain, but it did not go well. They thought we were spies. And so Simeon's back there. We've got to go back. And what's more, the money we're supposed to pay, we've still got it. And so then they say, and here's the last thing, Jacob, you're not going to like this, but we've got to take Benjamin back as proof if we're going to get Simeon back. We got to, And so Jacob does not want to do it. And several of them to say, look, this is the way it has to be.
Yeah.
So he finally relents, and they take Benjamin back. And when they got, and Jacob also says, you take twice as much silver. You tell them, you're bringing the silver back, and here's, twice as much, so that, because we want to be fair and honest. And so they do that. So this is going to impress Joseph as well. They've come back with Benjamin. They've done that. So there's this big banquet, and they're prepared to send them back on their way with 11 brothers now. So they're all packed up, and they get down the way, and Joseph has one thing more to test them. And that is, he takes a silver goblet, one of his best silver goblets from the banquet, and he gets that in the grain. And he puts it in Benjamin's bag. And so they get down the road just a little bit, and the police come, Joseph's police come riding up. They said, you've stole, there's a thief amongst you, And so they go through all their bags, and in Benjamin's bag, they find the silver cup. They said, he has committed this crime. Now he must serve as a slave. He has to go back in slavery. So, they're all there before Joseph, and this, that's the law at that time. This guy is a thief, and now he has to pay for it. So he'll pay in being a slave. And Judah And Judah, if you remember back to week 1 or 2, whatever it was, Judah was the one who was sort of instigating, let's sell them into slavery.
Yeah.
That was Judah. And Judah stands up and he says, no, this will kill our father. Take me. I will serve his sentence. I'll be the slave. Let it be me, not him. So Joseph now knows that they changed. And this is, I will mention this, this is one time in the scripture he sends all of the other Egyptians out. It's just him and the brothers. And he cries so loud that they could hear it down the road. And so you think of all this triggering stuff of being there with his brothers, and all this emotion was that, recounting all the times that he had been in prison and all the hardship that he had gone through. And it's all coming to a head there. And he just, the emotions come out.
Yeah. And
then he says, I am your brother Joseph. It is me. So.
Man, Cliff, like one of those like, dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it's the big reveal.
Yeah.
I'm he. Yeah. I'm Joseph.
Yeah.
And so what do you think the brothers did?
Probably got the big eyes like, uh-oh.
They're thinking like, oh no,
yeah.
Now we are in
trouble.
Big trouble. But he said, come close to me. And he said, listen, don't feel bad about what happened. Don't feel bad about what happened. God has somehow used it. And he says this pretty famous scripture, which I'll paraphrase, what was meant for evil, God has used for good, for the saving of many lives. Because I'm here and able to do this, life has been sustained. And there's 5 more years of this famine to come. But God has put me in this place. And yes, it was hard and it was a weird road, but I'm here for a reason. God has used it for good. And so that's where we ended last week, where they're coming through. So, great story, great reveal of Joseph revealing himself there and all of that. And, we get to the end next week. I won't get ahead of myself, but kind of looking at what we can learn from this. So I'll throw them out one at a time.
Yeah.
And then we'll
before you do that, and maybe you kind of alluded to it, is there a reason why he wanted to keep Benjamin specifically back? Just because he was the youngest and they thought it was going to be a dangerous road ahead, or?
No, Rachel had 2 children. Rachel was his favorite wife.
Yeah.
There were 3 that we know about.
Right.
Rachel was his favorite, and Joseph was favorite, and Joseph, it was Rachel's youngest son. Joseph's his little brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not sure when he was born either.
Yeah.
But he might have been born after
Got it. So
Joseph
because
left.
Joseph was
or he
gone.
been very, very young.
Okay.
Anyway, but yeah, he was the new favorite, I guess you might say.
It.
I think the brothers had sort of gotten over their enviness after they saw how hard he took Joseph's, supposed death.
Yeah.
And so, does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was so trust takes time to rebuild. We see that, if we've been betrayed, don't feel guilty for setting boundaries. Trust should be restored through proof of change. Okay, and we see that in Joseph. He's not just going to rush right in.
And I think that's something very prevalent in our world still today. I think there's been issues in my life. I think there's been issues in people I love's life who that's been very much so the story is somebody has come across, hurt somebody badly, created a space where boundaries had to be set, but then continued to let that little bit of trust that they do earn. And I will say, even though those little bits of trust, it's still like you kind of have to, like I think you're kind of saying it is kind of like level up to a spot where you can kind of be fully integrated back into life, if that makes sense.
If people have this sort of, lack of a better word, abusive traits, where they would betray someone. There's a history of how they got there.
Yep.
And it's very easy to fall back in there. It's kind of default position. Under stress, they're, going to do it again.
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't mean that they can't change that ever.
Right.
But we can get in a relationship where we're so eager, we do love them, we're so eager to regain the idealistic relationship we
what
might
they
have,
should be,
we might have in our head, but
Yep.
it's not there yet. There's going
Right.
to have to be some change. These are very heavy and complicated kind of life scenarios that we're covering in just a few seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't mean never, but it does mean we need to be cautious because it's going to be better for them too.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time, and the boys, the brothers, have had a long time to think about what they did, and there
Do we
really
know
does seem to
roughly
be
how many
change.
years we are? I mean, just 20
I mean,
years.
like 20 years. I mean,
Okay.
it's been at least. No, he was in prison for like 4. It's been at least like 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah, that we can add it from Scripture, and it could have been longer than that.
Sure.
So, well, it's said, and I pointed this out Sunday. I skipped over it here because it confuses me. But they said that Joseph understood what they were saying in that one scenario where they were talking about, like, we're being punished,
Yeah.
because he was speaking through an interpreter. Well, he's one of them. He grew up with them. He doesn't know the language.
Yeah.
So I don't know if either has been gone so long that he's forgotten the nuances of the language, or if he is pretending not to.
Yeah,
know the language.
maybe he's just kind of
Yeah.
staying in role.
But if it's something language he spoke, and then you're speaking another language for a lot of years, I can see how you could forget at least parts of that language. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how that works.
I think, I mean, I do think in the story it's very big of Joseph to, because as you said, I mean, there were some very hard times along the way, but to him just come and be like, I am your brother, and kind of bring him back into the fold a little bit.
Well, I think at some level, regardless, I mean, that's why we get into these sort of codependent relationships, because I mean, he was their brother.
Yeah.
I mean, so he wanted it to be an idealistic way. He wanted it to be. He wanted them to be together. At some level, regardless of the hurt, there was still the family, and where love is on that scale, I don't know. But yeah, I'm sure he longed for his dad in those days as well.
Yeah.
So, but he didn't rush into it. He wanted to see evidence of change. The second thing I said is forgiveness is a choice. Even when trust isn't possible, and this is really kind of broadening out to our personal, even when trust isn't possible, forgiveness is, because it releases from bitterness. And I guess you could say that Joseph, to live in the integrity that he must have come to peace with what happened to him.
Yeah.
And forgiven them already, because it happened, and I just can't live here in this bitterness. I've got to move on.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. Is one of the things that you see in the Joseph story is he moved on. If you don't move on, if you just sit in this time, this happened to me, and you never get past that, then you're never going to grow, and you're never going to, I think, really experience, God's plan and God's path.
Yeah.
So
You're kind of putting yourself.
Bad things happen. I don't think God caused all this.
Yeah.
I think human sin caused this. Human free will caused this. But God can redeem it, and God can work it. But if we want to get on board with that, we've got to get past our own bitterness and let go of that and say, okay, God, this thing happened. It was horrible. How are you going to remake it?
Yeah.
How are you going to redeem it?
Yep.
How are you going to make me stronger because of it? And that's what Joseph did.
Yeah, I think when we find ourselves in these bitter spaces, we're almost locking ourselves into our own little personal prison cell with it. We're not allowing ourselves to be freed from it at some level, and I think especially when we're like, well, it's never going to be right unless this person does this or whatever, and that might be true, but your personal happiness can't be dependent on whether somebody else finds that space for you.
I do 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the last point or the takeaway that I was presenting this Sunday was that God can redeem even the worst betrayals, because this was an incredible betrayal. Now, you've pointed out something that I want to echo on a little bit, and that is there's been a lot of time here. I could probably go at them and see what the Bible says, but 20 years.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of time that has passed here. And so the brothers have changed and grown too.
Yeah.
They've had to come to terms with their sin. I don't know exactly the nuances. We don't know that part of the story. But you do see a change in this brother just by the fact that their defense for Benjamin, Judah, who goes from being this envious, wants to sell his own brother into slavery, to say, hey, I'll spend the rest of my life in slavery, just don't do it to him.
Yeah.
And don't do it to my dad. And
Well,
so
and
there's been growth that's happened with both Joseph for sure, but also with the brothers
Yeah.
to this point. And so even though there's been this terrible betrayal, God can redeem it. God can redeem even the worst betrayals. And so if somebody has been in a relationship or something has happened in their life and they have been betrayed in really, really difficult circumstances, realize that God will work it out.
Yeah.
Peace can come from it.
And don't skip over these tests. I think these tests are exactly what showed Joseph that his brothers had grown up and changed, because it would have been real easy for them to just not go back with the gold or the silver and the food, Mm-hmm. But they did show back up, and they brought Benjamin back, and even when the cup was found in Benjamin's bag, like, this is where they started showing more of their character and stuff like that,
Sure.
of where they have grown.
Yeah. And even there may never be a relationship again, but God's redemption may look very different.
Yeah.
It may make you a stronger person. It may make you a more empathetic person to be in ministry with people that have gone through similar experiences, and help them sort of navigate through that.
Yeah.
And say, hey, you're not crazy for still having those feelings, Corrie ten Boom, there's a story about forgiveness that I really like, I read somewhere. I guess it was in one of her books. But she talked about, like, she, if you know the story of Corrie ten Boom, she was a Christian,
Right.
But she was also Jewish. And so it was in Nazi Germany, and she and her sister, I think her sister had actually even been killed by the Nazis in this concentration camp. And so she was having trouble forgiving one particular person in the Nazi had been one of the guards there, because he had been so cruel. And she'd been working on that part of her life and forgiveness and trying to move on and trying to find some peace about it. So she went to a priest about it and said, what I just said, look, I'm having trouble releasing it. And he said, well, anger and bitterness is like ringing a church bell. Even though we don't have church bells anymore, we know what they are.
Yeah.
It's a big rope, and you're pulling it, and it's really heavy. And when you get it, it has this force going back and forth. And he said, forgiveness is releasing that rope. But even after you release that rope, the bell's going to keep going for a while. And he says, when you feel those pains, it's just the residuals of it, slowing down. And so, it is a process. It doesn't happen instantaneously or overnight, or even sometimes in just a few weeks or months. It can take years.
Yeah.
And so, it's a heavy topic. I think it's something that's somewhat universal to all of us. Maybe the degree of how much we've been betrayed varies, but I know of some really, really deep betrayals.
For sure.
And,
Yeah, I'm sure as a pastor, you've heard a lot of, not necessarily from people here, but in your time, you've heard a lot of these stories.
I've seen it both ways. I've seen people that were just too, let's say there's one of the spouses was just completely abusive, couldn't go either way, man or woman, but, and the other one was so loved them and wanted so much to have that ideal relationship and keep their family together and all that they would just rush back in, and then the same thing would happen again.
Right.
And so instead of having that separation to make sure that everybody's healthy, but I've also seen people that it happened years before, and they're still bitter. They're still stuck in a moment.
Yeah.
You two had that song, "Stuck in a Moment,"
Yep.
and you can't get over it. And it's human, and I get it. I understand. But, you got to release that rope and let God begin the healing process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, Dave, and we are right at time. And just want to say, if you find yourself, if you're out there listening, you kind of find yourself in a circumstance where maybe you need to release that rope, or maybe you need to start putting up some boundaries. We've talked about them a lot here, but we do have Stephen ministers that are trained people that can help be listening ears and stuff like that to kind of walk through some of this stuff with. And I just want to reiterate that is an option that we have. There's also space where we would be open to speaking with you guys as well, because these aren't things you should have to walk through alone.
Right.
And I think that's the main thing. We as a church can come beside and help each other in these circumstances. But also, if you're somebody who has maybe gotten to the other side of some of this stuff, as Dave said, use that experience and use that wisdom that you gained through there to help speak into the lives of people who might just be starting in on some of these things that are happening to them. So remember, everything in your life that happens, it can be turned around and used for good as well. So just wanted to kind of close with that. Dave, do you have anything to add here at the end?
I'm good. You always ask me that. I never do.
Maybe I should stop asking. But
that's okay. Sometimes I do.
Yeah, sometimes
Once or twice over 100 episodes I have. But yeah.
But yeah, if you have any comments, anything, drop them in the chats below on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're listening to us from. And without further ado, we'll catch you guys next time.
God bless you guys.